Greetings and welcome once again. My name is John Gabriel, and in this video, I'm going to talk about recommendations that sometimes I get on academia simply because I'm part of the community. So sometimes they come in the form of somebody who saved a paper to the library, and the paper he saved is the development of mathematics in a nutshell. So let's take a look at that paper to see how that's going to affect this poor Chinese boy or whoever he is, Japanese, whatever. So in this paper, and I have to make the writing bigger because I can't see it that small at all. So anyway, this guy, Abraham, of course, he's a mainstream academic. Doesn't understand that mathematics doesn't evolve. It just is, has always been, will continue to be. Well-formed concepts are not invented; they're discovered. Okay, um, so then he lists 7 periods, and I didn't bother to read all of them. But this classical mathematics, he says axiomatic geometry, which is totally wrong. There's no such thing as axiomatic geometry. And what you should do is look for I'll place a link to it, article called There Are No Postulates or Axioms. And then, of course, my updated book, The Ultimate Book of Numbers. Okay, so what he says is the Greeks introduced to mathematics a fundamental abstraction, the separation of the proceedings of mathematics from the empirical to the logical. Actually, that's just his idea. I don't even know if that's just incoherent to me. It doesn't make sense at all. And the arrangement of the facts of geometry upon a hierarchy of statements, pinned upon the acceptance of first principles or axioms. So the part that's completely wrong is this part here. Now, if you repeat a lie thousands of times and pretend it's true, it is believed to be true. The same thing happens if you repeat a truth and claim it is a lie. Because then, just like people have been doing about my new calculus for decades, they've been claiming it's wrong. Okay. It doesn't mean it's wrong because they've been saying it. So if you repeat a statement long enough, people begin to believe what you repeat. There are no axioms in sound Greek mathematics. Okay. Zero. So that's the first lie in his book. Then he continues down here, and basically he quotes a lot of other writers who, yes, that's another way to get your lie believed. You simply have to print it in a journal or publish it somewhere, and then it becomes established, reliable, worthy knowledge. Total bullshit, of course, but that's how mainstream academia is. Okay, so he carries on here, and he says in another part. From empirical mathematics arose through abstraction the sciences of arithmetic and geometry. That's completely wrong, by the way. Even the order is wrong there. The abstract science of mathematics began first with geometry, and then from geometry came number, and then of course the operations of arithmetic are established first in geometry and then transferred to arithmetic through the abstract unit. Now, so here he'll tell you that some stories about the Egyptians had a developed complex system and the Babylonians, but the truth is, neither of them had even a modicum of complexity, and their ideas were entirely flawed. Okay. I mean, really, the Babylonians and the Egyptians contributed essentially zero, and there's a large mainstream movement today, revisionist movement, which is trying to pretend that the Babylonians realized or discovered trigonometry before the Greeks did. Absolute rubbish. Okay, so he says the science of geometry. Well, actually, he doesn't even understand the elements, but you can't blame him because most mainstream academics think this way. Okay, so the next part I want to get to is, when he talks about how the Greeks blew a fuse when they discovered uh, magnitudes that could not be measured. So now I don't know where that is here, but all right, maybe, and I don't think I can search for it on here, unfortunately. But it's pretty interesting to see how he writes it because It's not only biased, it just shows that he's a moron and he hasn't really understood anything at all. And somehow this moronic knowledge is going to be passed on to Ping He. Okay. Anyway, so who's going to read and think, wow, this guy's brilliant? So he says, but it was deeply unsatisfying for the Greeks to have a theory in which every length cannot be represented by some number. No, that's not how the Greeks thought. The Greeks didn't think with emotion. All their thoughts were logical. They were not after a system that would measure everything. They already had one. How did they have one? Well, go to my YouTube video here and see how the Greeks knew how to do arithmetic even before numbers came on the scene, okay? I am a genius and I know what I'm talking about. This guy here, poor guy, he's just a fucking idiot, like most of you. But hopefully after this video, you'll be a lot smarter. So, now, the Greeks already had a way to do that, okay? And this video here shows you how you can do all those operations. And I'll also place a link to a book called Theory of Fractions for Dummies, where you can learn how the Greeks actually solved all those problems without any concept of number. The concept of number only comes in Book 7. And the very first definition in Book 7 is that which introduces number. It says a unit is that by virtue of which all things are called one. It's a very tricky definition because if you just read it without having any background, it doesn't make any sense. It took me 3 decades to understand that statement. And basically what it says is that in algebra, and it didn't have algebra then, so it was not called algebra, but in algebra, where we want generality and don't care about precision, we introduce what is called an abstract unit. In other words, a unit whose type and size is irrelevant. Do you understand that? Okay, so I explained this in some videos before. That means a way of talking about lengths, masses, volumes, etc., without having a physical unit. Okay, so for example, if you had a cat and an apple and a pie, you can simply count these up using the abstract unit. This is a high level of abstraction. Doesn't care about the type or the size. Okay, 1, 2, 3. But of course, before you get to 1, 2, 3, you have to have ratios of natural numbers, which come from Book 5, right? So all that is developed in Book 5. So then he says later on, goodness, it's a load of crap, but I mean, I can't blame him. He was taught by idiots. So he says that he continues to say that it's not really a problem. But of course, that's a straw man argument. The Greeks didn't see it that way. And he said, indeed, a simple length, a diagonal of a square, it's not simple, by the way. It eluded the common notion of number. Actually, it didn't. That's how it was discovered, because the Greeks defined number. A number is a name given to a measure that describes a ratio of magnitudes. Okay, so in other words, there is no measure of the ratio diagonal to square side. There is no measure of this. Okay, doesn't exist. They weren't flummoxed. They knew back then that it doesn't exist. All right. It's only the idiots of today that think that they can calculate it and that they can measure it. They can't measure it because it doesn't matter how many decimal places you produce or how many radix places you produce. It's never equal to this number. So there's no one, not even God, can measure this ratio. Okay. Did you hear what I said? Not even God can measure this ratio. The ratio of circumference to diameter is another ratio that cannot be measured. Again, not even God can measure it. They knew that, by the way. It didn't elude them. It eludes the fools of today. So he continues here to put in a little spice, and he says, but it was deeply unsatisfying for the Greeks to have a theory. That's just his personal opinion, and it's just totally wrong, in which every length cannot be represented by some number. As if, he's belittling their idea of number. Actually, the Greeks defined number. They just didn't have a chance to write it down perfectly as I did in my book called The Ultimate Book of Numbers. So I'll put a link to that. I suggest you download it. Okay. I explain everything in there. So he says numbers were regarded as complex objects, and then he says, the resolution of the paradox. First of all, there wasn't a paradox. And he says the problem of numbers is its expansion to include all sequences of rational rubbish. A Cauchy sequence does not define any number. Okay, and set theory is anti-mathematical garbage. You can't write down a sequence followed by three dots and claim that that represents a real number or an irrational number. That's the kind of crap that you learn in a real analysis course at universities worldwide. It's totally false. And a lot of it is based on that father of all mainstream mathematical cranks, George Cantor, okay, who really went insane. So, and then he comes here and he talks about countably infinite and uncountably infinite, which are two both worthless concepts that have uh, zero use in any mathematics. They're not even interesting, by the way. So, and that, by the way, that is what Cantor's fame is based on, objective cardinality. Cantor was an absolute moron, not to mention insane. So, then he goes on and he puts in his little 2 cents worth of these developments led to the watershed results of calculus, differential calculus, problem of tangents, and problem of areas. Actually, it's not a problem. It's the link between slope and area. Okay, so nobody understood that before me, so I can't really blame him for that. Okay, now, whenever you read an article, be very careful. Also, the more the more quotes it has at the end, the more suspect. Okay, so when you see references like this, this is meant to convey an impression that the guy who wrote this is very well read. Oh, and by the way, he even includes himself. The Phenomenology of Mathematics, August 2006, and Analysis and Its Foundations, 2009. Okay, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's a professor at some university. Okay, so yeah, lots of uh, references from fellow idiots that have been published and therefore are, reliable in some sense or other. They're not reliable, but they're, perceived as reliable because they've been published. So you have to remember that anything you read in the mainstream is not established knowledge, okay? It never has been established. There are so many flaws in mainstream mathematics. You have to be really careful and read with a mind that cuts the ideas and dissects them into thousands of pieces, because these guys are idiots, okay? I mean, they haven't been taught by smart people. I don't care whether they've gone to MIT or Harvard or University of Washington. They're idiots, okay? And I do know better, yes. Actually, yes, I do know better. So I'm going to put some links in a detailed section. And I'm probably going to comment to this guy that, he needs to be really careful about reading the crap that is written in this article. It's a load of garbage for the most part. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little presentation. My name is John Gabriel, and this is a New Calculus channel. If you're not already a subscriber, become one. Follow me on academia. Tell your friends about it. And I'll be chatting with you again, hopefully soon. Goodbye.